Regarding Men, Episode 28, ICMI Recap.
Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I'm Janice and I'm here with Tom Golden of Men Are Good and Paul Elam of A Voice for Men and an Ear for Men. And we're going to be talking about the International Conference on Men's Issues, which just wrapped up over the past weekend. It was on from August the 16th to 18th and took place in Chicago at the Sheraton Suites Hotel in right outside of O'Hare uh, Airport, and everything was there, and it was, as always, a wonderful time. The magic of ICMI did not fail. If anything, it was stronger than ever. I'm not sure if there's a final tally of numbers of people present, but certainly it was at least as robust as the last couple of conferences that I've attended, maybe more people present. The atmosphere was riveting. It was super positive. There was chatter like you wouldn't believe. We had panel presentations and individual speakers going on from 9 in the morning till 9 p.m., often going on concurrently. The the electric energy, the sense of purpose, the sense of camaraderie, the positivity, of course, they were all there. The quality of the presentations was tremendous. And we're going to talk a little bit about some highlights and maybe a bit about what made this conference unique as well, although in many ways it was very similar to others in its focus, of course, and all the experts sharing their knowledge. Was a little bit different in that the organizers made the decision to include speakers and presentations on the larger culture war. So we had lots of panel presentations this time, which I'm not sure we had so much at other ICMIs, and lots of discussions of sort of wider issues, the way the media deals with men, the way the media demonizes men. We had discussion of the Covington kids, for example. We've had discussions about the Gillette ad, the APA's decision to publish its guidelines for psychological practice with boys and men, and the general cultural effect of all this negativity, all this blaming and shaming of men. And so there were a number of people present, fairly high profile speakers like Sargon of Akkad, for example. He was probably the biggest star, but others like a young man who does videos under the pseudonym Mr. Reagan, who does kind of right of center political commentary. I don't think he would consider himself a men's rights activist necessarily, but he's sympathetic to men's issues. Tommy Sotomayor, I'm not sure. He's a comedian who talks a lot about fatherlessness, especially in the Black community. I'm not sure if he would call himself a men's rights activist, but these are people who are sympathetic to men's issues, aware of them, see it as a huge part of the culture war. And so I think they widened the parameters of discussion and added different voices into the mix. And so I found it incredibly interesting and exciting. And of course, there were a lot of people that everybody who's involved in men's rights activism knows about, researchers like Don Dutton talking about the extensive work he's done on domestic violence and the reality of domestic violence and how it differs from the paradigm that we're all told of the violent man and the non-violent woman, and the violence being used to prop up patriarchal privilege. I mean, he just blew that notion out of the water. It was fantastic. And there were all sorts of people who were active in fathers' rights. Seemed that was one of the themes that especially emerged with prominence, the impact of fatherlessness, both on fathers themselves and, of course, on their children. And many, many speakers, including ones here, spoke very eloquently about that, and just all sorts of fantastic speakers. So I don't know if we want to touch on a few highlights, talk about what made this conference unique. I don't know, Tom, do you want to
Well, I'll talk about a highlight. I'll talk about a highlight that I really liked. That was Janice's presentation.
Oh.
I'm very serious. I'm very serious. That was probably one of my two favorites of the whole thing. You know, Janice is an English professor, and she took a poem from Byron and a poem from T.S. Eliot and took those poems and read parts of them and showed how who's privileged? You know, back then during Byron's time, who's privileged, the men or the women? During T.S. Eliot's time, who's privileged, the men or and it was just a bomb. It was just great, man. And people loved it, Janice. Just loved it. It was fascinating. Just absolutely fascinating.
I got to echo that too.
Yeah, man.
As a matter of fact, to let you know, I got Skype messages and emails about that. It was not only bringing in Byron and Tennyson, but also E. Belfort Bax.
Yes, I forgot Bax. Right.
And looking at the political realities of the time.
Yes.
You know, this era that we consider the most patriarchal in history, where men were men and smoked cigars and women weren't allowed to eat until the men were done, and all the rule of thumb, that, you know, sort of bullshit idea about that women could be beaten with a stick no wider than a man's thumb. Turns out it was really just a carpenter's rule. That's all it was. There never was a rule of thumb. And we've dug out some of those facts in the men's movement over the years. But what Janice did was, to me, just remarkable. One, you have an audience of MRAs who ended up standing up in a rousing, enthusiastic standing ovation over somebody lecturing using poetry.
That's a feat in itself.
Yeah, absolutely a feat within itself. And I know, yes, because I was one of the people on my feet.
Me too.
It was, and I'm not trying to embarrass her, but it was one of the most, if not the most remarkable speech there. Another highlight, as long as we're done paying homage to Janice. Another highlight for me, honestly, was Sargon's speech. Mm-hmm. And for one reason in particular, I mean, it is, and I was saying this before we got started, and I've been saying this forever, I really sort of take a tongue-in-cheek approach a lot of times to the culture warriors of our day who are out there using talking points that you could have peeled off of a Voice for Men's pages 10 years ago. And they're now just getting around like it's a new discovery. Oh, look, we've discovered that feminism does evil things and that we have our own problems and that we need to talk about them. Well, thank you very much. You know, where were you 10 years ago? But to his credit, one of the things that he brought up in his speech that seldom gets talked about is that the men's movement doesn't involve an ism. We don't do masculism, right, or masculinist or whatever kind. There's not an ideological foundation to this. Only there's a principled foundation. And Sargon, in probably the shortest speech there, brought that out, that we talked about issues. We didn't talk about, you know, how things ought to be in the world for men, and we don't talk about, you know, we don't want government agencies to pop up and to advocate. Well, there's some of that going on. I'm personally not in favor of it. I don't believe government is the answer to men's problems. I think the principle of equal treatment under the law goes a long way toward helping men, and would be, quite honestly, a step down for women. But I mean, that's the truth. And we are a truthful movement. We try to do everything we do based on research and facts and honesty and principles, not on ideology.
Yes.
And Sargon articulated that particularly well in his speech. I was really glad to see it.
Yeah, I was surprised by that because I'd never thought of that before. You know, I'd never put that into perspective, but he really just nailed it. You know, and when I started thinking about it, I thought, yeah, that's damn well right. You know? By the way, guys,
movement like that.
These talks that we're describing now, you're going to be able to see. So it's not like we're doing this in vain. You're going to be able to watch these online. I don't know, will they come out next week, Paul, you think?
I can't give you a deadline. Our videographer travels halfway across the world to get to us. He's got to travel back. I don't know about you guys, but when I got home and I only had to fly from Chicago to Roanoke, I was toast and needed rest and sleep. So it may be a couple of weeks before we start seeing the videos. That's fine. They're well worth waiting for. I just want to point out one more thing. There was another movement that was not an ism and that was just based on equal treatment under the law, and that's the American Civil Rights Movement.
Interesting.
That's what we have the most in common with. That was not an ism.
Yes, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. It's interesting because a friend of mine who I'd never met before but had corresponded with probably 5 years, he attended the conference, so I got to meet him. And he stayed on a couple extra days and saw a bit of Chicago, and he talked to a lot of men there. And he said that one of the things they started talking about and did a little informal survey of was the fact that most men come to men's issues not because they read some, theoretical tract or, because of some kind of ideological bent, but because they've had an experience that has, either deeply harmed them in some way, often divorce and losing custody of one's children, things like that, a false allegation, that kind of thing. But just something that makes them realize, hold on, wow, I thought I lived in a world where I was at least had equal rights or even was privileged, as I'm always being told I am. Now I realize actually the deck is stacked against me. And so they did a survey. Every single man there had been awakened to men's issues because of that kind of searing personal experience, or even just having the feeling of not being liked by society. And I think that is part of why we're not about isms. This is not about ideology. This is not about some kind of utopian theory or anything like that. This is about very specific issues and talking about them with statistics and with studies and with concrete ideas about how things need to change, not with some kind of pie in the sky ideology.
Yep.
I think it's that is just critical to this movement. And for me, one good reason for that is that we have the opportunity to, avoid victim politics. That's a killer. It's just a killer. It disempowers people. It makes them weak. It makes them helpless. It makes them cry for, the government or some other, major entity to intervene on their behalf and make their lives right, which of course is never going to happen.
Right.
And so that's why you see in the men's movement writ large, you see things like MGTOW and, men taking a different path or subscribing to a philosophy that doesn't leave them at the mercy of the system or at the mercy of women in the system. And it's them taking their lives in their own hands. I've been maintaining for years, and I wrote about this in my book, and I have put this online for a long time. The vast majority of men's issues can be ameliorated, at least partly, by men's choices and decisions and by taking responsibility for those choices and decisions. We don't want the government to rescue us. Oh my God, the government makes a mess of everything it touches. Why on earth would I want to rely on a government that can't make a penny on mailing a letter to take over my rights? And rights aren't, that's just, we can get into a whole philosophical bandwagon about government and rights. But in the end, the men's movement charges the men in it to do something.
Yes.
With their lives, with their decisions. And it's why you see at our conferences, there's not a bunch of screaming women with wide belts and Doc Martens and thin mustaches. You see a lot of happiness. It's amazing, the level of happiness in the audience, the camaraderie, the friendliness that's there, the willingness to help that's there. I don't see that in feminist activities. I see a lot of screaming, a lot of belly aching, a lot of you owe me. And it is just amazing to witness that. It's one of the main reasons to go to an ICMI, because they're all that way. None of them have ever been any different than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's none of the, at a feminist conference, you always get some grandstanding. There are power struggles going on. Somebody's always going to stand up after somebody else's presentation and say, well, you never talked about the Black lesbian experience. And then you're going to have, then you're going to have the shamed white heterosexual woman having to apologize for failing to take into account the Black lesbian experience. And you're going to have the First Nations woman, and she's going to stand up and shame the others because they didn't take into account Indigenous perspectives. And that has been going on in the feminist movement for 30 years. And it's ramping up, if anything, now. And because the men's movement isn't interested in the kind of hierarchy of victimhood and the supposed moral purity that people can claim because they've got all these intersecting, vectors of victimhood, we don't have any of that. We just have Black men, white men, gay men, straight men talking about the commonalities and the differences, but without trying to, pull some kind of power move on one another or pretend to be more oppressed and therefore, deserving of greater adulation. And I really appreciate that about these conferences. They're so fantastic in that way. And even sometimes people quite vehemently disagree. Maybe there's a religious issue or somebody advocates. I remember last year somebody advocated working with white nationalist groups, and every half the audience was like, what are you talking about? But it's always civil, and people just say, I don't think that's the route to go. I don't think we want to go down that path. And everybody's it's incredible. It's quite unique.
Yeah. For the record, I feel like I have to say I don't subscribe to the idea that we should work with white nationalist groups.
Yeah, right.
Speaking of Black men, another presentation that I really enjoyed was Tommy Sotomayor. He was a trip. He's funny and he tells the stinking truth. And he tells it in a way that will make you laugh. I was just fascinated by I learned a lot about Black women and the men's perception of Black women in the Black community. I had no idea that it was as he had described. He was saying that men are very unlikely to challenge the word of a Black woman in the Black community. Is that close to what you guys got from it?
Oh, absolutely.
And he was saying they almost admire the white men for being able to call out women, So,
well, and you look at the history of the Black community. What happened is
right.
They were the first community targeted by arm's length social justice warriors coming in to say, why don't we just pay you to kick men out of the home and have a bunch of single mothers, disempowered fathers.
Yes.
And it turned the Black community into a matriarchy. And guess what? We're headed in the same direction.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not like it's unique to Blacks. They were just the first ones to get the boot.
I think you can go back even farther, Paul, because during slavery, it was the Black females who could maintain their role of childbearing, whereas the Black males were stripped of everything. And so it kind of put the Black females in control at the time. And I think we're seeing a lot of that sort of trickle down from there too. And maybe that's a part of why the Black men are afraid to challenge the Black women.
Well, I certainly think it made it easier to disenfranchise Black men.
Yeah.
I want to point out, I think what you're saying is absolutely true. We do know, though, that in 1960, for instance, the average Black family had a mother and father who lived in the same home and had high home ownership.
Yes.
It was notches down socioeconomically from white communities, but it was still home ownership and two parents in the home, stable families. Yes. Then in the 1960s, the leftists came in and said, here's some money if you kick the guy out.
Man.
And they literally destroyed the Black community. This is what has made it easy for them to wage the war on drugs, primarily in the Black community. It's made it easy to inflict all kinds of these so-called good intentioned social policies on those. But now you look in rural America, and what do you see? Single mothers everywhere. Yeah. It's climbing like crazy. And you see government with more control.
Yep. Yeah, you know, the Moynihan report came out in '62, I think, and it was very clear. It said the problem with the black community is basically father absence. They knew that then. What do? They do nothing to keep fathers in the home. In fact, they do a lot to yank them out. So, and we're seeing the same thing happening now with not just blacks, but with whites, with white men being yanked from the homes. And the fatherlessness, I mean, is 38% of school-age children do not live with their natural father. 38%.
It's a recipe for disaster.
It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. So Sotomayor's is a good one to watch also. You know, I would highly recommend that one.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He's a wonderful speaker, wonderful performer, a wonderful human being. I mean, you just, he's such a pleasure to listen to.
It's nice to learn and laugh at the same time, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, incredibly insightful. A big surprise for me, and unfortunately, I don't know whether this was, well, anyway, it unfortunately happened to be speaking while two other discussions were going on, all great. And so there are only about 5 of us there to listen to him. But this is the CEO of Agard Watches. And he had a pre-recorded talk of about maybe 15 minutes in length, and then he actually was there live to speak to those of us who were there at his presentation. I didn't expect it to be like that. That guy, he is incredible. I was so surprised. I mean, obviously I knew that he had made his men are, you know, this is what a man is commercial in response to the Gillette ad. So obviously he had some savvy, some awareness, and, you know, some concern about the way men were being portrayed. But wow, to listen to him tell how it was that he came to make that ad, and he's made a number of follow-ups, and he wants to keep on with this. And he was so incredibly articulate and impassioned. I thought most, you know, he probably works 14 hours a day keeping his business going, and yet somehow he has managed at the same time to research men's issues. He's another one who's come to it through experience. He's seen friends of his have their lives ripped apart post-divorce and all the horrible things that happened to men at that time. He's seen their depression. He's seen alcoholism. He's seen suicidality. He's really concerned about that. He's looked into the statistics. He's especially interested in that very vulnerable period for men right after they've been divorced and what that does to them. So he wants to keep running his business, but at the same time launch this whole series of ads and mini movies celebrating men. He's inviting people to send him little videos about individual men in their lives whom they admire and whom they love, so that he can blast them out to all the people on his mailing list. He wants to be sort of the go-to person for positive messages about men in a business context. And he said he's gone to like all these business fairs and that everybody's on the social justice bandwagon. You got to stand up for women. You got to do this. And he's the one voice saying, no way, men are the ones who are being so demonized, so unfairly portrayed. And yeah, he's just wonderful. I hope one day we'll be able to talk to him. And I was thinking maybe I shouldn't mention this now, wait till we speak to him if we can, but I just had to say something about him because it was so wonderful, and he put aside so much time to speak to people at the conference. And I really encourage everybody to at least watch the presentation that he did, because it was fantastic.
Well, you will be seeing that presentation when we get the video of it. It'll be on my channel, and it will be around asking people to mirror it on all their channels to get that out there. Excuse me. His name is Alon. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Rupovich is as close as I can get. So my apologies for butchering your name, sir. But we do want to get what you had to say. It was a matter of scheduling, was why the crowd was sparse for that. I wish everybody in the conference had been there for your presentation. I wasn't even there for it. I'm anxious to see it.
We were presenting at the time.
So was I. Know that this guy had the guts to do what he's doing in a business climate that favors social justice warriors. But I think he's also savvy with business. You know, Gillette has now been devalued $8 billion US since their idiotic commercials. And now they claim to be, what is it? They're saying they're going back to pointing out the best in men, which is
yeah, right.
that you've been pointing out the worst in men.
No.
Which is why a razor blade company would do this is totally beyond me. But I think everybody should have an Eckhart watch, and we should ask people to buy this man's products.
Yes, I agree.
Really should.
And they're beautiful watches.
They are. They're gorgeous.
They really are. I mean, it's a really nice product. This is not some kind of garbage.
No, they're not like as cheap as a Timex, but they are very affordable. They're beautiful. And we owe it to this guy.
Really, really.
I really do.
Yeah. I've written to him. I hope that I can hear back. And sir, if you're watching this, you can go to regardingmen.com and leave a contact, and we'll get a hold of that. So
absolutely.
We want to hear from you. We'd like to push what you've done as much as we can. So we really appreciate it.
Right now, we're going to offer you free advertising in our newsletter.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll put it out there for you. But
we sure will.
That was another highlight. It was the one thing I missed that I really wished I had missed while we were there. But we'll catch it next time.
Yeah. You know, another one that I really enjoyed was Robert Franklin's piece on fatherhood, the neurobiology of fatherhood. Guys, you should watch this one. It's a mind blower the whole way through. Just fascinating stuff.
Stuff you've never heard before, I can guarantee you.
Probably never heard. He talked about fatherhood beginning 500,000 years ago. You know, why? And what they're thinking is that it started 500,000 years ago because the brain expanded. The human brain expanded at that time, necessitating men and women be parents for a longer period of time. And so fathers had to be more active. And this pushed men into being fathers. And what they found is that fathers parent through the neocortex, the problem-solving part of the brain. Mothers parent through the limbic system, the older kind of mothering sorts of behavior. So it's just—
You can say it, Tom, emotional.
I won't say it. I won't say it. But it really is. I mean, Robert's presentation was just fantastic, and you'll learn a lot from watching that one. It's good stuff.
Yeah, just so much good stuff.
Oh, man.
I want to introduce my negative note, though, and my negative note has to do with the incredible paucity of female attendees at this conference. I'm not sure, of course, I didn't do a count, but I think there were fewer women at this conference than any of the others I've attended. Who knows why? And I could be wrong, too, but it was notable. I remember once attending a breast cancer fundraiser, and a friend of mine noted the quite large number of men present, but said that there were very few gay men. And this was, you know, I forget why she was pointing this out, but, you know, and her point was that lesbians had been involved in the AIDS crisis activism around that for a long time, and now gay men needed to step up to support women and breast cancer research and fundraising and all that kind of thing. But I mean, it was startling. I couldn't believe how few women there were. And I was embarrassed as a woman to look around and see that sea of men, and so few women coming out to learn about the things that men face and to learn about all of the research that our allies are doing. I couldn't believe how few were there.
And I want to say directly, I mean, again, you know, I'm just going to say what I mean.
Uh-oh.
A lot of the anti-feminist women out there, you talk a real good game. And then when it comes to supporting men in an active way, you're no-shows. So maybe some of you decide whether or not you're entertainers or whether or not you actually care about the other half of the human race.
Interesting. I have to admit, I don't think I even noticed, Janice. You know, I was happy to be amongst all men. You know, it was fine for me. You know.
Yeah, it was great, but I didn't notice at the time so much, but it was afterwards. I thought,
Yeah,
where
and
are
when you said
women?
that, I agree. It was probably what, 3%, 4% women?
Yeah.
And the ICMIs I've been to before was much higher, maybe 20, 25%, 1 out of 4 maybe. Is that about right?
1 out of 4, 1 out of 5,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
Somewhere around there. I don't think it was as high as 1 out of 4 actually, but there was still a stronger presence of women. And, you know, again, like if women don't want to come, that's fine. I mean, the guys had a great time.
Yes.
I don't think it diminished the event, but I think it diminishes women that they're not.
Yes. Well, they don't get the opportunity, you know,
Yeah.
to learn about things because there's so much that was taught at this conference, a lot of good information.
One thing I do need to say, though, that was suggested by a female psychologist that was there, this is to my own embarrassment. She said, you know, she called me aside and said, have you considered at this men's event creating some things that are male space? Because everything was mixed. And guess what? They say, listen to the woman. Sometimes that is true, my friends.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
At the next ICMI next year in Australia, we are going to have some male-only events going on in there. Specifically, no girls allowed.
No.
That's interesting because actually, you know, one of the presentations that I really enjoyed was Alan Franson's discussion of boxing and why he believes every man should box or be involved in some kind of like physical contact, not just sport, but actual, what are those called? Well, combat sports. That's not the right term, but you know what I mean. Yes. Kickboxing, you know, something like that. And he went into a lot of detail about why it's so, he feels it's just absolutely fundamental to men sense themselves. And I felt a little funny being there. I actually thought that it was not for me, although of course I enjoyed it. It was fascinating and everything. I don't know that anybody minded having me there, but it did seem like it was a man talking specifically to men. And I can see the utility of having sessions that are men-only spaces.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I missed that one.
You don't want to box, Janice?
I'd like to, actually. I think it'd be fun, but I think I'd probably enjoy it in a different way.
Well, I think all of us go to some extent. We're in combat all the time anyway.
Well, that's what he said. You've already been hit in the face.
Yeah,
you know?
That's it.
Yeah. You get hit in the face all the time.
Yes.
There's a good reason for that, though. I think Mike Tyson said it best. He said, everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the mouth.
Exactly.
And then you have to make it by your own wits from that point forward.
Yes.
Out the window. And so I agree. I enjoyed boxing for a while, and I enjoyed Taekwondo in my youth. But I do recommend it for every man.
Yeah.
And well, it looks like we're out of things to say.
That's about time, don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's probably enough time.
We could go through all the presentations. They were all so good, but we should probably.
And they were quality, outstanding presentations.
And the ones we've talked about are going to be great for you guys to go back and see. I mean, each one we've talked about is well worth your time. So good. In a couple of weeks, they'll be out there and you can look at them.
Absolutely. They will be out on my channel. And we're not going to be greedy with these. We're going to encourage other channels to mirror these videos, get them out there. The idea here is not to covet this stuff, but to spread it around, let everybody experience it, and you get just a tiny, tiny taste of what being at the conference was like. But it is just a tiny taste. If you're ever going to really get it, you've got to show up. We are, for the next 2 years, going to be doing this overseas, or at least in American terms, overseas, by going to the east coast of Australia, in the Sydney area, and then in Delhi, India, before we come back to North America. This is an international conference on men's issues, and we have an international following. There were people there from India, from Australia, from the UK, from Ireland, from Wales, from Scotland, from Canada, from the United States, from Mexico. I mean, and it goes on and on and on. I counted at one point, it was up to like 17 countries being represented at that event. And those were just the ones that I knew about.
Yes. Good stuff. Really good stuff.
Okay. Well,
are we
I
finished?
guess that's it. I guess we're done.
All right. Men are good.
Most not for good. Men are good. Subscribe to the Regarding Men newsletter. Link below. Get these notifications for these videos and a lot of other good stuff every week in your mailbox, but only once a week. We won't flood you with stuff.
Fair enough. We'll see you then. You all take care.
Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.